The for loop container has three key properties. The first one is a init expression. This lets you set a variable to a beginning value to start the for loop iteration. Then there's a val expression. This configures the main expression that it uses to determine whether execution should continue within the for loop container. When this expression evaluates false, the for loop stops iterating and the task ends. And then there's a assign expression. This assigns a value to a variable based on an expression that is evaluated on each iteration of the for loop execution. The operation of a for loop container is quite similar to how for loops behave in most programming languages, even to the point of using a variable's value to control loop execution. One way to use a for loop is to repeatedly run a script. Maybe the script is checking for the availability of some resource, such as a file or a security event, before executing a data flow task. You could also use the container to wait for and process Microsoft Message Queue messages. Once the script determines that the resource is available, the data flow task can execute. So that's just one simple example of how you can put the for loop container to use. In this example, I'm going to create a package that waits for a file to appear in a target directory, and then I'll notify the user that the file has arrived. Now, there are plenty of techniques for responding to external events and integration services, of which this technique I'm going to show you is only one. For example, you might want to use the WMI Event Watcher task in order to watch for a file to appear. So there's lots of ways that you can do this sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to create a new project here. File, new project. And I'm going to put it in samples, and I'm going to call this for loop. Click on OK, and it creates the project. All right, I want to rename the package here to process file. All right, so the first thing I want to do is create a package level variable. So I'm going to come up here to SSIS and open the variables, select the variables here, and open this variables window. And I'm going to add a variable, so I'll click the add variable button there. And I'm going to name this file arrived, because I'm going to use this as a kind of marker that a file has arrived within a file folder. All right, I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to leave the other defaults. Scope is process file, which is this package. Data type is int32, and the value starts out, or the default value, is 0. Okay, I'm going to move that out of the way because we're done defining that, but we can always get back to it right there if we need to. And now I'll add a for loop to this package. Double click on it, and there it shows up within the control flow. I need to configure it, so I'll double click on it to open up the for loop editor. So what this dialog box is going to do is it's going to let me configure the loop. So here are those three properties that I talked about: init expression, eval expression, and assign expression. So the first one is init expression. So I want to initialize this and set this value to, I'm going to set a value for that variable that I just defined, user file arrived. And I'm going to set that value to 0. Press enter. Okay, so again, that's the initialization expression. When this loop container starts executing, when I execute the package, that file arrived is going to be initialized to 0. And then I need an evaluation expression. This is going to guide how long this container is going to execute. So this is actually fairly similar. So I'm going to copy this here, because I'm going to compare this, use two equal signs, to 0. So as long as file arrived is 0, this loop is going to continue. Okay? Once it changes to a different value, then this expression right here, will evaluate to false. And the loop will stop executing. All right, very simple expressions in this case, but you can build some very complex expressions if you care to. And it's very important to understand this is the assignment expression, single equal sign, and this is the comparison, equality comparison operator. Now, I'm going to leave the assign expression blank because I'm going to have a script task that's contained within the container that's going to update the value. All right, so that's all I need to do to configure the container. Click on OK, and now the container is configured. Now I want to add a script task to the for loop container. So right there, double click on it, and that added it to the for loop container automatically because I had the container selected. Okay, and so you can see that the script task comes along with it, so it is actually contained within the container. Now, first thing you need to do when you configure a script task is to specify which variables, if any, that you're going to use within the script code, particularly the ones that you're going to update in the script code. All right, so I'll double click on that, and I'll select the read-write variables because I need to update the value of that file arrived variable. So I'll click on the ellipsis button, and as you can see, there's only one user-defined variable here. So I'm going to select that because this is going to be a read-write variable. I need to read the value and I need to write to it within the script task. And I'll click on OK, and that adds it to this list of read-write variables. And if you had multiple variables defined within the package or specifically within the scope of this script task, then you would have multiple variables and you could specify which ones the script task is going to be accessing. All right, next thing I need to do is edit the script. Click on the Edit Script button there, and that opens up this full Visual Studio code editor. And as you can see, it opens up this script main.cs file that has all of this built-in code right here. Now, I'm not going to get into the details here, but the idea is that you can write .NET code and get as fancy as you want with what you have the script task do. You have pretty much full access to the .NET framework as well as other external assemblies. You can do some very sophisticated stuff here. So this is one of the great extensibility points of integration services. In this particular case, I need to change the code here for the main method. Just like in many programming languages, main is the main entry point for my custom script code within this component. So I'm going to delete this comment here about adding my code here. I do want to leave this line here because I need to indicate whether or not the task executed successfully. I'm going to essentially make it in all cases happen that the task executes successfully, but I could indicate failure, include some try blocks and catch blocks and so forth, test for various conditions, and I can set it to failure if I need to. Okay, but we're going to work with very simple code. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write some code that is going to check to see for the existence of a file, and then if that file is there, change the value of that file arrived variable. Okay, C# code, so it's if system.io.file.exists. Notice you get full IntelliSense. This is a Visual Studio code editor. Parentheses, and now I need to specify the name of that file. And I need to give it a full path. So this file is going to be in SSIS samples containers. And the name of the file is going to be newfile.txt. All right, so there's my if statement. Just going to check to see if the file exists. And then, when it does exist, I'm going to assign a value to that file arrived. To get access to the variables, I need to use dts.variables. So that's how I reference those variables. It's a member of that variables collection. And I need to grab the value of it. And I'm going to set it equal to 1. Okay, so that's all the code that I need. Again, a very simple example. You can go to town. You can create additional classes if you want. You can create other private methods that you call from main. You can write what amounts to a complete .NET assembly. Get as fancy or stay as simple as you want. Okay, so I'll save that, and I'll close this code editor window. Done configuring the task, click on OK, and so now that script task is completely configured. Again, I specified that I'm going to use the file arrived variable within this code, and then I wrote some code that updated that value. So the idea here is this for loop is going to execute. The script task is going to execute. It's going to check to see if that file exists. If it doesn't, it just continues to loop. And file arrived, the value of it is not changed. When the file does in fact arrive, then it will change the value to 1, and the for loop container will stop executing. Okay, so now I'm going to define another script task, but this is going to be outside of the container. I'm going to rename this to notify of arrival, because this is a task that is going to do something when this loop container stops executing. In other words, when a file arrives in that designated folder. All right, need to configure it. And now I need to specify the read-only variable. In this case, it's not going to change the value of that file arrived, but it needs to be able to read it. So all of the variables, this is the link between all of the variables that are in scope for this script task that links them and makes them available in that variables collection within the scripting code. Now in this case, I'm just going to type in the variable. Need to specify it's a user variable and file arrived. But again, I can also just use that ellipsis button like I did for the other script task editor. But one kind of weird thing about this is that if I did use the ellipsis button, notice now that all of the system variables are included. That's because I'm defining a read-only variable, and the system variables are read-only. So in that case, if I wanted to use this dialog box in order to select file arrived, I'd need to scroll down in order to find it. Okay, but it's already selected because I just typed it directly within the box there. So whichever way works best for you, entering them. Okay, once again, I need to edit the script. Opens up that code editor. And I'll need to add some code to this module's main method. Notice that it's still called script main. And in this case, I just want to pop up a message box. In real application, message boxes appearing within integration services packages are not the best user interface, but it works for our example here. Okay, so I'll do message box dot show, and I'll just say file arrived. And we're happy about it, so I'll add several exclamation points. Okay, and then I'm going to leave this task result line of code here to success. All right, I'll save that, Control S, and I'll close the script editor here. Everything's configured, and I'll click on OK. All right, now I need to link the two items, so I'll select the arrow, okay? And so now when the loop container successfully executes, I'll get this notification of arrival. All right, I'm going to go ahead and execute the task. And notice that the for loop is executing. Script task, it's executing over and over and over again. The loop container is executing. It's continuing to execute, continuing to execute, continuing to execute, as you can see there. And the reason, of course, is because that folder doesn't yet have that file. So what I need to do is come back over here, and this is Learn Now Samples Containers. And so what I need to do is now right-click on this. Actually, let me move this window over a little bit and narrow it down a bit so we can see what's going on. All right, so I'm going to right-click there and select New Text Document. And I'll do New File, and watch, I'll hit Enter. File is created. Task is still executing because this message box knows that it now stopped executing there because the code within the script task executed saw that the file had arrived, set file arrived to 1, and that dropped execution out of the container over to this script task here that is popping up this message box that says file arrived. So if I get this out of the way, you can see that this is still executing because that code is blocked as it does for message boxes. When I click on the OK, closes that, that script task then completes execution.